It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. Machiavelli wrote this in The Prince, but he wasn't talking about tyranny. He was describing the magnetic pull of a man who understands that respect precedes desire, that the psychology of attraction flows not from desperate pursuit, but from controlled distance. He understood what neuroscience confirms 5 centuries later. The human brain assigns higher value to what remains slightly out of reach, to what maintains its own gravity instead of orbiting desperately around another. You walk into a room and she notices you immediately, but not because you're the loudest voice or the most eager presence. There's something different, something she can't quite name. While other men lean in too quickly, laugh too hard at her jokes, mirror her energy with transparent desperation, you exist in a different frequency entirely. Your phone stays in your pocket. Your attention doesn't chase. Your smile arrives a beat later than expected, as if it's crossing a greater distance to reach her. This isn't performance or calculated coldness. This is what Machiavelli called virtù, that quality of self-possession that ancient thinkers recognized as the foundation of all real influence. Modern psychology has dissected this phenomenon into attachment theory, scarcity principles, and neurochemical cascades. But the truth remains elegantly simple. Attraction flows toward what maintains its own center of gravity. The first invisible habit that creates this magnetic effect lives in the space between your words. Most men fear silence like it's social death, rushing to fill every pause with commentary, explanation, validation-seeking chatter. They mistake constant talking for connection, not realizing they're actually broadcasting their anxiety in real time. But when you learn to inhabit silence with complete comfort, something fascinating happens in the observer's brain. Mirror neurons activate. She begins matching your emotional state, and if your silence carries calm authority rather than awkward emptiness, her nervous system interprets this as confidence, not the loud, performative kind. The quiet certainty of someone who knows their words carry weight precisely because they're carefully rationed. Neuroscience research from Dr. Edward Smith at Columbia shows that when we encounter someone comfortable with silence, our brains immediately begin filling that space with positive projections. We assume depth, intelligence, emotional control. The silent person becomes a blank canvas for our most favorable interpretations. This is why the Stoics cultivated silence as spiritual practice. Why Machiavelli advised princes to speak little and observe much. They understood what MRI studies now confirm. The human mind assigns greater value to information it has to work for, and silence makes people work to understand you. But here's where most men get this catastrophically wrong. They confuse silence with coldness, turning quiet into a weapon of withdrawal. Real magnetic silence isn't absence or avoidance. It's presence without pressure. When she speaks, you listen with such complete attention that your stillness becomes its own form of intensity. Your eyes stay on hers a half second longer than comfortable, but without the hunger that makes eye contact predatory. You nod once, slowly, letting her words settle before you respond. And when you do speak, your first words aren't agreement or disagreement. They're a question that shows you actually heard the layer beneath what she said. Why do you think you've always been drawn to that? What part of that experience changed how you see things? Questions that demonstrate you're not just waiting for your turn to talk. You're actually engaging with her interior world. If this perspective fascinates you, subscribe, because we're about to go much deeper into the psychology that most people never examine. The mechanisms we're exploring here aren't about manipulation. They're about understanding what actually creates attraction at the neurological level. The second invisible habit operates in complete opposition to what popular dating advice preaches. Everyone tells you to show interest, demonstrate desire, make your intentions clear, but Machiavelli understood that visible pursuit destroys attraction faster than almost anything else. He wrote about the principality that maintains alliances without appearing desperate for them, and this same principle governs erotic dynamics. The brain's dopamine system responds most powerfully not to what's obtained, but to what remains uncertain. Neuroscientist Dr. Wolfram Schultz discovered that dopamine neurons fire most intensely during anticipation, during the gap between desire and fulfillment. Once the outcome becomes predictable, the neurochemical cascade collapses. This is why the man who shows too much interest too quickly becomes immediately less interesting. His transparency removes the mystery that keeps dopamine flowing. She knows exactly how he feels, where she stands, what will happen next. Her brain, having solved the puzzle, moves on to more stimulating problems. But the man who maintains authentic indifference, not performed disinterest, but genuine investment in his own life that happens to include but not revolve around her, activates an entirely different neurological response. Her brain can't quite categorize him. Is he interested? Does he feel what she feels? The uncertainty itself becomes intoxicating. Attachment research from Dr. Amir Levine reveals that people with secure attachment naturally display this quality. They're interested without being needy, present without being possessive, because their emotional stability doesn't depend on any single person's validation. This isn't game playing. It's the natural consequence of having genuinely built a life that fulfills you. When you have meaningful work that absorbs your attention, friendships that nourish you, interests that genuinely captivate you, your attention becomes valuable because it's legitimately scarce. You're not artificially withdrawing to create attraction. You're naturally selective because your time actually matters to you. Watch what happens when you internalize this. She texts and you respond when you actually have time and attention to give, not immediately to prove your interest. You make plans, but you don't rearrange your entire week to accommodate her schedule. You enjoy her company, but you don't cancel your morning routine, your gym session, your creative project to be available. And paradoxically, this is when she starts leaning in. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because your life genuinely has gravity that doesn't center on her. The scarcity is real, which makes it magnetic in a way that performed unavailability never could be. But here's the psychological depth most people miss. This only works if the indifference is authentic. Women have spent millennia evolving social cognition abilities that detect incongruence between your words and your emotional state with frightening accuracy. If you're performing disinterest while desperately hoping she'll chase, she'll sense the performative quality and lose respect. True attractive indifference comes from abundance mentality, from having genuinely internalized that you're the prize being evaluated, not just the evaluator hoping to be chosen. Machiavelli called this sprezzatura, that quality of making difficulty appear easy, of being impressive without seeming to try. Modern psychology calls it secure attachment. Both point to the same truth. Real confidence requires no performance. The third invisible habit that makes men magnetic lives in their relationship with predictability. Human beings crave pattern recognition. Our brains are prediction machines, constantly building models of the people around us to minimize uncertainty and manage social interactions efficiently. This is adaptive, but it creates a problem for attraction. Once someone becomes completely predictable, they become psychologically invisible. Your brain no longer allocates significant attention to them because it already knows what they'll do, say, feel. They become furniture in your mental landscape, present but unnoticed. Machiavelli advised princes never to become too transparent in their methods or too consistent in their patterns. Keep allies slightly uncertain of your next move. Modern dating advice has corrupted this wisdom into be mysterious or keep her guessing, but that's cartoon villain energy. Real unpredictability isn't performing randomness. It's having genuine depth and dimension that reveals itself gradually. It's being the man who's deeply focused on his work most days, but occasionally suggests a spontaneous midnight drive, who listens quietly for weeks but occasionally shares an observation so penetrating she realizes she's been radically underestimating your interior world, who seems content alone but occasionally reveals vulnerability that shows complex emotional architecture beneath the calm surface. Research from Dr. Ayelet Fishbach at University of Chicago demonstrates that variety in rewards creates stronger habit formation and sustained interest than predictable rewards. Her brain doesn't want you to be random. She wants you to be complex. Depth that unfolds over time. Layers that reveal themselves when she pays attention. This is why men who telegraph everything immediately, who are exactly who they appear to be, with no hidden dimensions, lose attraction so quickly. There's nothing left to discover, no reason for her brain to keep allocating attention and curiosity. Share in the comments if you're starting to recognize these patterns, because this is where the psychology gets even more fascinating. The fourth invisible habit that creates magnetic attraction operates in complete opposition to how most men structure their lives. Watch what happens when a man enters a relationship or starts pursuing a woman. Everything else begins to fade. His hobbies become negotiable. His friendships get deprioritized. His personal goals take a backseat to relationship maintenance. He reorganizes his entire existence around her presence, her schedule, her emotional weather, and he thinks he's demonstrating love, commitment, devotion, but he's actually destroying attraction at the neurological level. Anthropologist Helen Fisher's research on romantic love reveals that the brain's attraction circuits respond most powerfully to individuals who possess what she calls self-expansion potential. We're drawn to people who expose us to new experiences, perspectives, and possibilities. But when a man dissolves his individual identity into the relationship, when his life becomes a satellite orbiting hers, he loses precisely this quality. He stops expanding her world because he stopped expanding his own. He becomes psychologically smaller, more dependent, less interesting, not because he's loving wrong, but because he's abandoned the very autonomy that made him attractive initially. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the prince who maintains his own power base independent of any alliance. The moment your strength depends entirely on another's favor, you become weak. The same principle governs intimate relationships. The man who remains committed to his own development, his own goals, his own separate existence, even within partnership, maintains the attractive quality of independence. He's choosing to be present, not desperately clinging to connection out of fear that without it, he'll disappear. This creates what attachment theory calls secure attachment, the paradoxical truth that the most reliable intimacy comes from two people who could survive alone but choose to be together. In practical terms, this means you keep training even when the relationship gets comfortable. You maintain your creative projects, your reading habits, your solitude. You have experiences without her not to create jealousy, but because your life genuinely includes dimensions that exist independent of the relationship. And paradoxically, this is what makes her feel secure, not threatened, because she's chosen by someone with options, someone whose presence is a gift rather than a desperate attachment. The man with his own gravitational center is infinitely more attractive than the man who orbits, because one demonstrates value through independence, while the other broadcasts neediness through dissolution. But here's the deeper psychological truth. Maintaining your own center isn't really about attraction tactics at all. It's about not betraying yourself in the pursuit of connection. So many men wake up 3 years into a relationship and don't recognize themselves anymore. Every hobby abandoned, every friendship faded, every personal goal postponed indefinitely. They thought they were being good partners, but they were actually engaging in self-erasure. And the tragic irony is that this self-betrayal destroys both the relationship and the self. She loses attraction not because she's shallow, but because some unconscious part of her recognizes she's with someone who doesn't value himself enough to maintain his own existence. And he loses himself, waking one day to realize he's become a supporting character in someone else's story. The fifth invisible habit that creates magnetic presence operates in the realm of perception, in how you actually see the person in front of you. Most men look at women through the lens of what they want, what they need, how the woman makes them feel. Their gaze is fundamentally self-referential, evaluating whether she meets their standards, fulfills their fantasies, validates their ego. But rare men possess what psychologists call mentalization, the capacity to see another person's full interior world, to understand that she exists as a complete subject with her own complexity, not just an object of desire in your psychological landscape. Machiavelli's genius wasn't just strategic cunning, it was observational precision. He watched human behavior with the detached fascination of a scientist studying a new species. No moral judgment, no wishful thinking distorting his perceptions, just clear-eyed recognition of how humans actually operate beneath their professed ideals. When you develop this quality in intimate contexts, something remarkable happens. You stop reacting to the surface presentation and start perceiving the patterns beneath. You notice the micro-expressions that reveal her actual emotional state beneath polite conversation. You recognize when her laughter sounds slightly forced, when her enthusiasm masks anxiety, when her questions are really invitations to deeper connection, disguised as casual curiosity. This observational capacity creates attraction because it's vanishingly rare. Most people are so consumed with managing their own presentation, so anxious about how they're being perceived, that they barely register the full humanity of the person across from them. But when you actually see her, when your attention is genuinely focused on understanding rather than impressing, when your questions follow the thread of her actual interest rather than steering conversation toward your agenda, she feels something she rarely experiences, being genuinely witnessed as a complete person. Research from Dr. Diana Tamir at Princeton reveals that when people feel truly understood, when someone demonstrates accurate perception of their interior experience, the brain releases oxytocin and activates reward centers associated with deep satisfaction. This is the neurological foundation of intimacy, not sexual attraction, but psychological recognition. And here's the paradox. This kind of seeing, this attention that asks nothing and simply observes with compassionate precision, often creates more powerful attraction than any performed seduction technique. Like this video if you're beginning to understand that attraction isn't really about tactics at all, but about developing into someone genuinely worth being attracted to. Because that's the uncomfortable truth beneath all these invisible habits. They're not really habits you can perform. They're qualities that emerge from deep personal development. The comfortable silence comes from resolving your own anxiety. The authentic indifference flows from building a life that genuinely fulfills you. The attractive unpredictability emerges from having actual depth and complexity. The maintained autonomy requires that you actually value yourself enough to not dissolve into every relationship. The perceptive observation demands that you overcome your own narcissism enough to truly see another person. Machiavelli understood that real power, the kind that endures rather than collapses at the first challenge, must be rooted in virtù, in genuine capability rather than fortunate circumstance. You can't fake these qualities for long. The man performing confidence will eventually crack under pressure. The man performing mysterious depth will eventually be revealed as shallow. The man performing independence while desperately needing validation will inevitably slip and expose his neediness. But the man who has actually done the internal work, who has built genuine self-possession, depth, autonomy, and perceptive capacity, doesn't need to perform anything. These qualities radiate naturally from who he's become. This is why the question isn't really, how do I become more attractive to women? The question is, how do I develop into someone worth being attracted to? And the answer has nothing to do with techniques or tactics. It has everything to do with choosing the harder path of genuine self-development. Going to therapy and resolving your attachment wounds instead of pretending they don't affect your relationships. Building genuine competence in meaningful domains instead of cultivating surface-level impressiveness.